Welcome to All-Time Epic Stories. Today, we present, Vikings Beyond the Raids, epic voyages that discovered new worlds. For centuries, the Vikings have been remembered as fierce raiders who descended upon monasteries and coastal villages with axes and fire. Yet this is only a fragment of their true legacy. Beyond the violence and plunder lay a civilization of remarkable explorers, master shipbuilders, and bold navigators who would change the course of human history. In the fjords of Scandinavia during the 8th century, a maritime revolution was taking shape. The Vikings were perfecting the art of shipbuilding unlike anything the world had seen. Their longships were engineering marvels, vessels that could navigate both the open ocean and shallow rivers with equal grace. Clinker-built hulls provided flexibility and strength. The keel, carved from a single oak tree, gave these vessels stability in the roughest seas. Every timber was selected with purpose, every joint crafted with generations of accumulated knowledge. What made these ships revolutionary was their shallow draft. Drawing less than a meter of water, they could beach on any shore, navigate inland rivers, and escape pursuit in waters no other vessel could enter. The square sail, woven from wool and often striped in bold colors, caught the wind with efficiency. When wind failed, 30 oars could propel the vessel forward through sheer human determination. But ships alone do not make explorers. The Vikings possessed something equally vital, an intimate understanding of the natural world that served as their navigation system. They read the ocean itself like a text. The color of the water revealed its depth. The patterns of waves indicated proximity to land. The behavior of seabirds pointed toward distant shores. Celestial navigation by the North Star was fundamental. During summer months when twilight never truly yielded to darkness, they tracked the sun's position and shadow patterns. Some historians believe they used sunstones, crystals of Iceland spar that could locate the sun even through thick cloud cover by polarizing light. Whether myth or reality, such ingenuity defined them. In the late 8th century, population pressures and limited arable land in Scandinavia created a catalyst for expansion. Younger sons without inheritance looked beyond the horizon for opportunity. The first major expansion moved westward across the North Sea. The northern Isles of Scotland offered fertile land and strategic positions. Orkney and Shetland became Norse strongholds. From these bases, Vikings pushed further into Scotland, Ireland, and beyond. But not all who sailed west sought conquest. Many sought empty lands where they could build new lives in freedom. Around 860 CE, a Norwegian chieftain named Nadad was blown off course while sailing to the Faroe Islands. What he discovered would alter Viking history, a massive, unknown island wreathed in snow. He called it Snowland. Later explorers would give it the name that endures, Iceland. Though seemingly inhospitable, it offered something precious, unclaimed territory. The settlement of Iceland began in earnest in 874 CE when Ingolf Arnarson established a permanent homestead at what would become Reykjavik. Others soon followed in waves. Within 60 years, Iceland's habitable regions were claimed. The settlers brought their laws, their gods, and their fierce independence. They created the Althing, one of the world's oldest parliaments. Iceland became a crucible of Norse culture, a place where the old poems and sagas were preserved in writing. But even this remote island was not the end of Viking ambition. In 982 CE, a man named Erik Thorvaldsson, known as Erik the Red for his fiery hair and temper, was exiled from Iceland for murder. His punishment would lead to one of history's greatest discoveries. Erik had heard tales of land glimpsed to the west. During his 3 years of exile, he sailed into the unknown and found a vast territory of fjords, grasslands, and ice. He called it Greenland. The name was strategic marketing. Greenland was hardly green, but Erik needed settlers. When his exile ended, he returned to Iceland with tales of fertile valleys and abundant hunting. Hundreds believed him. In 985 CE, 25 ships departed Iceland for Greenland. Only 14 survived the treacherous crossing. Yet those who arrived established settlements that would endure for centuries. The eastern and western settlements of Greenland housed thousands at their peak. They raised sheep and cattle in the brief summers, hunted walrus for ivory, and traded with Europe. Greenland's Norse also encountered new peoples, the indigenous Thule people, ancestors of the modern Inuit. Trade and conflict both marked these interactions across the Arctic frontier. But Greenland was still not the westernmost point of Viking exploration. Around the year 1000 CE, Leif Erikson, son of Erik the Red, heard tales from a trader who had spotted land even further west. Leif purchased the trader's ship and assembled a crew of 35. They sailed west from Greenland into waters no known European had crossed, seeking lands that would prove beyond imagination. The first land they encountered was barren and inhospitable, covered in flat stones. Leif named it Helgeland, stone slab land. Modern scholars believe this was Baffin Island. Continuing south, they found a forested shore with white sand beaches. Leif called it Markland, forest land, likely the coast of Labrador. The timber alone made the voyage worthwhile. Pressing further south, they discovered the most remarkable land yet, a place with rivers full of salmon, grasslands for cattle, and crucially, vines bearing grapes. Leif named it Vinland. The Vikings had reached North America, becoming the first known Europeans to set foot on the continent, nearly 5 centuries before Columbus. They established a settlement to wait out the winter. Archaeological evidence discovered in the 1960s at Lons Meadows in Newfoundland confirmed the saga's truth. The Norse had indeed built settlements in North America around 1000 CE. But the Vikings' American adventure would be short-lived. They encountered the indigenous peoples, whom they called Skraelings. Initial trade gave way to conflict and violence. Outnumbered and isolated thousands of miles from reinforcement, the Norse abandoned Vinland after only a few years. Yet they continued to venture to Markland for timber for another 3 centuries. The Viking expansion was not random wandering but strategic exploration. Each voyage built upon previous knowledge. Each discovery was remembered in poems, sagas, and verbal directions passed between generations. Their navigation methods were sophisticated beyond what many assume. They used a system of latitude sailing, maintaining constant distance from the equator by observing the sun and stars. They understood that Greenland lay at the same latitude as parts of Norway. By sailing west along this invisible line, they could cross the Atlantic with reasonable certainty of landfall. The Vikings also pioneered island-hopping routes. Sailing from Norway to Iceland to Greenland to Vinland allowed shorter open ocean crossings with opportunities to resupply and repair ships. Their knowledge of oceanography was equally impressive. They recognized the Gulf Stream's warm current flowing from America toward Europe, using it to speed their journeys home with trade goods. Weather prediction was vital to survival. Vikings read cloud formations, wind shifts, and atmospheric pressure changes with the skill of modern meteorologists, though lacking their instruments. The East was equally important to Viking exploration. Swedish Vikings, known as Russ, traveled the great rivers of Eastern Europe, the Volga, Dnieper, and Don opened paths to Constantinople and Baghdad. These Eastern Vikings became traders more than raiders. They exchanged furs, amber, and slaves for silver, silks, and spices. Some established the foundations of the first Russian states. The Varangian Guard, elite Byzantine soldiers of Scandinavian origin, served the emperors in Constantinople. Vikings found opportunity as warriors, traders, and even diplomats throughout the medieval world. Throughout their explorations, Vikings established more than temporary camps. They created genuine settlements, transplanting their culture, laws, and way of life to new lands across thousands of miles. Their legal systems traveled with them. The Thing, an assembly of free men who gathered to settle disputes and make laws, was established wherever Vikings settled in significant numbers. Women in Viking society possessed rights unusual for medieval Europe. They could own property, divorce husbands, and manage farms. This relative equality traveled to new lands as well. Viking religion traveled west too. Temples to Odin, Thor, and Freyja were built in Iceland and beyond. But the explorers also encountered Christianity, and gradually, transformation began. Iceland converted to Christianity around 1000 CE, officially, though many continued old practices privately. Greenland followed. The new religion slowly replaced the old gods across the Viking world. Yet for all their expansion, the Vikings faced limitations. The Greenland settlements, isolated and dependent on trade with Europe, struggled as climate changed and supply routes failed. The medieval warm period that had allowed settlement in Greenland ended around 1300 CE. The Little Ice Age that followed made sailing routes more dangerous and farming even more difficult. By 1450 CE, the Greenland settlements were silent. Whether the Norse died out, were killed, or successfully evacuated remains mysterious. They left behind ruins and questions that endure. But Viking impact on the lands they discovered lasted far beyond their settlements. In Iceland, the culture they established flourished, preserving the sagas that tell us what we know of their achievements. The Icelandic sagas, written in the 13th and 14th centuries, recorded the voyages of discovery with remarkable accuracy. For centuries, scholars dismissed them as mere legend. Only when archaeologists discovered Norse artifacts in North America did the world recognize that the sagas spoke truth. The Vikings had indeed reached the New World 500 years before Columbus. The Vikings' contribution to exploration extends beyond the lands they reached. They developed maritime technology and navigation techniques that influenced shipbuilding across northern Europe for centuries. Their cultural impact was equally profound. The Normans who conquered England in 1066 were descendants of Vikings who had settled in France. Norse blood and culture spread throughout Europe. Place names across the British Isles reveal Viking settlement. Any town ending in by or thorp marks Norse presence. Language itself absorbed hundreds of Old Norse words that we still use daily. Words like knife, sky, egg, and they entered English from Old Norse. The Vikings shaped not just geography but the very language spoken across much of the world today. Their genetic legacy is equally widespread. Modern DNA studies show Scandinavian ancestry throughout the British Isles, Iceland, coastal France, and parts of Russia and Ukraine. But perhaps their greatest legacy is the spirit of exploration itself. The Vikings proved that with skill, courage, and determination, no ocean was impassable, no horizon beyond reach. They were not driven solely by violence or greed. Many sought land, opportunity, and freedom. They were farmers and craftsmen as much as warriors, building as much as they destroyed. Their ships were masterpieces of design that balanced seemingly contradicting qualities: speed and stability, strength and flexibility, shallow draft and seaworthiness. Modern replicas have proven the saga's descriptions accurate. These vessels could indeed cross the Atlantic, maintain speeds of 15 knots, and beach on any shore. In 1893, a replica Viking ship crossed the Atlantic to the Chicago World's Fair, completing the journey in 28 days. The design, 1,000 years old, still performed flawlessly. The Viking success came from their holistic approach. They were not just sailors but observers of nature, students of wind and wave, star and current. They learned from each voyage, accumulated knowledge across generations, and shared discoveries through oral tradition before writing preserved their stories for eternity. Their exploration was methodical. Initial voyages scouted coastlines. Follow-up expeditions brought settlers. Support voyages supplied the settlements. Each served a strategic purpose. The distances they covered were extraordinary. From Baghdad to Newfoundland spans over 8,000 miles. Vikings traveled this range regularly, creating a medieval world system. They were cultural translators as well as traders. Arabic silver ended up in Scandinavian hoards. Byzantine silks reached Iceland. Irish Christian manuscripts influenced Norse art. Their artistic style evolved through contact with other cultures. The intricate knotwork and animal designs of Viking art show influences from Celtic, Byzantine, and Islamic sources. Yet they maintained distinct identity. Whether in Russia, Ireland, or Vinland, Vikings retained core cultural elements: their language, laws, and social structures. Their adaptability was key to success. In Iceland, they developed new techniques for treeless construction. In Russia, they mastered river navigation. In Greenland, they learned Arctic hunting. They were practical innovators. When they needed timber in treeless Iceland, they imported it from Norway. When that proved expensive, they voyaged to Markland and fetched it themselves. Their livestock traveled with them across the ocean. Icelandic horses, sheep, and cattle are direct descendants of Norse stock, genetically isolated for 1,000 years. The Vikings' seasonal rhythms governed their explorations. Summer sailing when seas were calmest. Winter planning and shipbuilding. Spring departures with prevailing winds. Their preparations were meticulous. Ships carried not just warriors but farmers, livestock, seeds, tools, and building materials. Each expedition planned for permanent settlement, not mere raids. Food preservation was crucial for long voyages. Dried fish, salted meat, hard cheese, and grain sustained crews for weeks at sea. Proper provisioning meant survival. Water storage presented challenges. Wooden barrels held fresh water, but consumption had to be carefully rationed on long crossings. Finding water sources was a priority upon landfall. Their medical knowledge, while limited by modern standards, included practical surgery, wound treatment, and herbal remedies. Ship's healers were valued members of any crew. They understood that successful exploration required cooperation. Crews worked as teams where each member's skill was essential. Democracy at sea meant survival. The concept of honor permeated Viking culture. A reputation for keeping one's word, for courage in adversity, for skill in one's craft, these mattered more than gold. Their poetry celebrated not just battle but exploration, craftsmanship, and wisdom. The skalds, poet-historians, composed verses that traveled with the ships and preserved deeds. The sagas they created are among world literature's treasures. The saga of Erik the Red and the saga of the Greenlanders provide our primary sources for the Vinland voyages. These sagas were written centuries after the events, yet archaeological evidence consistently confirms their historical accuracy. Memory preserved through oral tradition remained remarkably precise. The archaeological site at Lonseux Meadows yielded iron nails made by Norse smiths, a bronze cloak pin, a spindle whorl, everyday objects proving the extraordinary tale. Ongoing research continues to reveal Viking presence in North America. Possible sites in Newfoundland and Labrador suggest more extensive exploration than previously thought. Some evidence suggests Vikings may have traveled even further south along the American coast. A Norse coin found in Maine hints at either trade or further voyages. The Vikings' failure to colonize North America permanently was not due to lack of ability. Indigenous resistance, distance from support, and small population doomed the attempt. Yet the attempt itself was extraordinary. With no maps, no certain knowledge of what lay ahead, they crossed the Atlantic and established settlements on a continent unknown to medieval Europe. Their navigational achievements rivaled any in history. Polynesian wayfinders crossed the Pacific, but Vikings conquered the stormy North Atlantic with equal skill. The technology they developed influenced European seafaring for centuries. Medieval cogs and later carracks incorporated principles learned from Viking ship design. When European exploration resumed in the 15th century, navigators used techniques refined from Viking methods: latitude sailing, island hopping, coastal mapping. The Viking Age officially ended around 1100 CE, but their legacy shaped the medieval world. Normandy, Russia, England, Ireland, Iceland, all bore indelible Norse marks. In Iceland, the Viking heritage remained purest. The language changed so little that modern Icelanders can read medieval sagas with relative ease, a unique linguistic preservation. The Vikings proved that medieval people were capable of remarkable achievements. They were not ignorant or superstitious primitives but skilled, thoughtful, and courageous explorers. Their story reminds us that history is complex. The same culture produced both brutal raids and extraordinary exploration, fierce warriors and skilled craftsmen, destroyers and builders. Understanding the Vikings requires seeing beyond stereotypes. They were neither noble savages nor mere barbarians, but real people responding to challenges with intelligence and adaptability. Their voyages of discovery were driven by multiple motives: seeking land, trade opportunities, adventure, exile, and yes, plunder. Human motivation is rarely simple. What unites all Viking explorers is courage. To sail into unknown waters, to face weeks at sea with primitive navigation, to build new lives in harsh lands, this required extraordinary bravery. The Vikings expanded human geographic knowledge immensely. They connected Europe to the Arctic, Eastern Europe to the Middle East, and Scandinavia to North America. Their legacy lives on in the laws of Iceland, the place names of England, the genetics of millions, and the sagas that inspire us still. They proved that oceans were bridges, not barriers. When we remember the Vikings, let us remember not just the raids but the voyages of discovery. Not just the warriors but the navigators, settlers, traders, and explorers. Let us remember the sophisticated ships that carried them, the navigation skills that guided them, and the courage that drove them to seek what lay beyond every horizon. The Vikings remind us that human potential for exploration and achievement transcends any single era. The spirit that drove them to cross the Atlantic in wooden ships endures. They were medieval people who accomplished what we might think required modern technology. They proved that human ingenuity, determination, and skill can overcome seeming impossibilities. Their story teaches that exploration is not merely about reaching new places but about expanding human possibilities, connecting distant peoples, and proving that we are capable of more than we imagine. The Vikings of 1,000 years ago sailed into the unknown with courage we can still admire. They changed the world, discovered new lands, and expanded the boundaries of human achievement. Beyond the raids and the violence, beyond the stereotypes and myths, the Vikings were among history's greatest explorers. Their voyages of discovery deserve to be remembered alongside their reputation as warriors. The Vikings' epic voyages remind us that history is richer and more complex than simple narratives allow. These medieval explorers crossed oceans, discovered continents, and pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Viking exploration. If you enjoyed discovering the truth behind these remarkable voyages, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. What aspect of Viking exploration surprised you most?